Hey everybody, Mr. Youngman here. Today we're going to be taking a look at how to use and set up the boom pole that we have available to us in class. We're going to go ahead and get started by looking at the different components that we have in front of us. So what I was just holding up there was our carbon fiber boom pole. Carbon fiber is great because it's a little bit lighter weight than aluminum, which means it'll be easier to hold this above our heads when we're doing our boom pole job. Next up, we have a shock mount. So this is going to be used for mounting the microphone onto the boom pole and to help absorb any bumps to make sure we don't hear it in the audio recording. Next up, we have our microphone. So this is the Sennheiser 416 microphone, and this has been used in a number of large film productions across the world for a long time. So that's a really great microphone. I'm very excited we'll be able to use it together in class. And lastly, we have an XLR cable. This is how we're going to physically connect, or rather electronically connect, our microphone to our boom pole. To get this process started, I'm going to grab the shock mount first. So with this shock mount, we're going to want to hold the grip comfortably in our hands to make sure this is facing the right way. And then we're going to grab the microphone and we're going to slot it into the mounts on the top. Now you do have to use a little bit of force when we're doing this. And you'll hear that kind of clicks or pops into place there. We'll do the same on this side over here. And that will get it into position. So when we're setting up this microphone, we do want to have the 3 pins on the microphone, kind of making a little bit of a down arrow. So I'm just going to rotate this ever so slightly so that those pins are in the right position. Now next up here, what we're going to want to do is tuck this cable to make sure that it's not going to get in our way. So to go ahead and do this, we're going to take this little tab on the already attached XLR cable and slot it into the back of the mount. And that's just going to help keep that tucked and out of the way. So next up, we're going to take this little pigtail and we're going to connect it to our microphone. Now you'll notice if you look closely at that pigtail, that has the same shape as the down triangle that we were making earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in, lining up the pins with the holes, and that is going to position that onto our shock mount. Now the last step in this process here is going to be screwing the shock mount onto the boom pole. So this time I'm going to take the boom pole, and you'll see that it has a little metal piece at the top, and we're going to be able to use that to screw into our shock mount. So I'm just going to screw this into the shock mount, just twisting it slowly here. And I'm holding onto the XLR cable just to make sure that it's not banging around. Carbon fiber is a wonderful material. However, it is easily damaged. So we do want to be really careful of our XLR boom pole here. And I'm going to give this the old wiggle test to make sure it's not going anywhere. And we can see that this microphone is on here nice and safe. Our next step in this process is going to be plugging in the XLR that is already connected to the boom pole into the bottom of our shock mount. So I'm just going to, again, look for the triangle on here, make sure that the pins are facing the same way on this little pigtail. And we're going to plug that right into our shock mount. And now you see we have a nice clean configuration here where all the cables are flowing into each other to make sure that we can hear that audio signal nice and clear. Our next step in setting up this boom pole is going to be connecting the other XLR cable to the bottom of our boom pole. So again, we're going to look for the holes on this XLR cable, and we're just going to plug that right on into the bottom of our boom pole here. Now this is a fragile connector, so we do want to try our best to avoid putting pressure on this connection. So just be very careful of this particular part of the boom pole. We don't want it getting damaged. Now with the other end of our XLR here, we're going to want to plug that into either our camera or our sound mixer. To plug our boom pole into our camera, we're going to want to connect our XLR cable right onto this slot right here. So just like before, we'll line up the pins with the holes and we'll slot that right into our camera. You should hear a loud click once it clicks into place. So when we're operating this boom pole, we're going to want to be able to make it shorter or longer. As it stands right now, This boom pole is not looking very long. So let's see if we can go ahead and change that. If we twist on the collars, and I usually like to start with the outermost collar first, we can twist that counterclockwise to loosen it, and that will allow us to extend or retract the microphone. Once we get it into the position where we want it, we can go ahead and twist the collar back the opposite direction. And now we have just a little bit more length on our microphone. Now we do have a whole bunch of these collars here that we're able to continue extending even farther and farther when we're using this microphone. In some cases, it may be necessary to extend all of that at once if we're trying to record a subject that is very, very far away from us. Next, we're going to go ahead and talk about boom pole technique, how we should be holding and using this setup. So in order to use this setup, we're going to want to try to ideally keep our hands on this portion of the boom pole, as this will be the most steady. Using two hands, we're going to hold the microphone above our heads. And the reason for this is we usually need this boom pole to be just out of frame of the camera. Now this does get pretty heavy over time, but it is just kind of part of the job of being a boom pole operator. The whole point of this is to get the microphone as close to the person talking as possible. There's a couple different schools of thoughts on where the microphone should be pointed, if it should be pointed at their mouth or if it should be pointed at their chest. Realistically, if you get it somewhere in between those 2 points, you're going to be looking and sounding pretty good. To make sure our boom pole is pointed in the right direction, somewhere in between the chest and the mouth, it might be necessary to adjust the angle of the shock mount. If we use this dial right here and rotate it counterclockwise, that'll loosen it. You'll see that it kind of flopped forward here. Ideally, we want to avoid that, but it's kind of hard to do this while demonstrating. But this will allow us to change the angle of our shock mount. I'm going to go ahead and lock that back down just by pointing or just by rotating that in the clockwise direction. And now we're all set to start booming our talent. When it's time to pack up our boom pole, we're simply going to twist that collar in the counterclockwise direction again. There we go. And collapse the extension back down. We always want to make sure we're locking that collar once we're done, just to make sure that we're not going to accidentally have it slide out on us and damage either the boom pole, the microphone, or another person. Once we're ready to unplug our cable from our camera, we're just going to do the reverse process that we used to connect it. Once again, we're going to want to hold down on the metal tab and just pull out from the camera to unplug our XLR cable. The next step in taking down our boom pole is going to be disconnecting this XLR right here. You'll see if you look at this XLR that there's a button that we need to hold down, a little metal tab, while we're unplugging this, or we're going to risk damaging the equipment. Hold down on that tab, and then with a little bit of a pull, we should be able to unplug the XLR from the boom pole. Our next step is going to be unplugging this XLR from the bottom of our mount. Just like before, we need to hold it down on the metal tab as we're releasing to make sure we don't damage the equipment. From here, we're just going to grab onto the mount and start twisting the boom pole or the mount itself. And this will allow us to disconnect the shock mount from the boom pole. Now we do want to be really careful when we're unscrewing this. A lot of this equipment is very fragile, so we really want to make sure that we're not going to drop it in the process. Next up, it's time to unplug this cable right here. We're going to hold down on this tab and pull that XLR out from our microphone. If it hasn't already, we'll want to pop this protective tab off from the back of our shock mount as well. Next, we're going to pull the microphone off of the mount the same way that we put it on. Just being careful as we're handling this, we'll pop this off of one tab, and then again, being careful not to drop it, we'll pop this out of the second tab. And that's it. Everything's ready to go back to the equipment lockup, and I will see you all back in class. Bye now.